For old-fashioned recipes in your garden and needs, while sipping on Kentucky bourbon. You sit right back in your big red hat, we're taking rural back from the urban. Listen to the stories where Kentucky is proud, share the giggles with all of your friends. You're all tuned in to Friends Drifting.
Good morning. It's Friends Drift In, episode 12.
Episode 12.
Today we're going to be talking about tomatoes and high tunnels. Charlie, what's a high tunnel?
Well, a high tunnel is an unheated greenhouse. Now, there are several different types of high tunnels you can get. We have a 30 by 96 high tunnel with raisable sides. Our sides, I think, are 4 foot high. You could roll them up on the side and let air in and out. We've got a sliding door on either end of our high tunnel.
Like
also,
a barn door.
Like a barn door, but it's made out of a clear plastic, or
Corrugated
plastic panels. And then you can get 1 layer or 2 layers of plastic. We chose to go with 2 layers. Gives you a little bit more insulation, which gives you a little bit longer growing season
On both ends.
And we're actually a little bit late this year, but we are planting in the high tunnel. There are many different types of high tunnels. There's a high tunnel with an automatic roof that raises for ventilation, which is what we may want to get to next, because that's really good. You can set a timer on it by temperature and it'll raise and lower on its own.
You'd be surprised how hot a high tunnel will get, even in cold weather. One of the reasons that we chose the double insulation. So what we have when we talk about double on the high tunnel, you have a plastic layer that is here and a plastic layer that is here, and you have a little fan that keeps air between it, and that gives an extra layer of insulation for the cold part, because we're still in redbud winter.
Yeah.
I mean, one day it's 70, the next day it's 30.
Well, the thing too about when she's talking about that, you take 2 sheets of plastic, you put them on there loosely, is what you do. And they're on the outside of the structure itself, and then when you put the air to it, it pops up and it makes them tight.
Looks like a balloon.
Yeah, basically that's what you're getting. Getting a balloon, you're getting like 3 to 5 inches of air between the 2 layers, which actually magnifies the sun's heat coming in. And we were in the high tunnel this weekend. It was 60 degrees outside. It was over 100 inside the high tunnel with the sides down.
It gets hot fast. It will surprise you. And when we're doing tomatoes, and if you're doing a high tunnel for the first time, one of the things that you can tell when you're doing a tomato is if it's got too hot, is that the leaves will start to curl a little bit. So they get a little, and I don't have a picture to show you, but the leaves curl up a little bit. They're trying to conserve their moisture and their energy.
You see the underside of the leaf is kind of a lighter, almost a whitish green.
Right.
And you see that turning up on the edges, you know you've got too much heat.
Too much heat, and so we have a couple of big fans that we have in there that we use just to keep cross ventilation, and we also, we use a drip irrigation system.
Ma'am. Well, that's really one of the biggest benefits of having a high tunnel is using just a drip irrigation. We've got ours set on, I think it's 12 inches, and it is really inexpensive as far as that. You can actually hook a hose up to a main line and drop those in there. There's a lot to it. We'll go through a drip irrigation system in another day, but it's really good, especially for tomatoes, because you don't get any water splashing up on the plants, which is where you get most of your disease problems from tomatoes and peppers.
So when we talk about tomatoes, Charlie, there's 2 different kinds of tomatoes.
You have a determinate and an indeterminate. Now, determinate used to be they would have 1 flush and done. Well, that's changed now. I guess there's semi-determinate as well, where you get 2 or 3 small flushes. You get 1 really big one and 2 or 3 afterwards. But now the indeterminate will grow as long as the weather's good. We have had indeterminate tomatoes in the high tunnel as late as
Thanksgiving.
No, as late as Christmas.
Christmas last one
Yes,
year
whenever we had Christmas time.
By the time we get down to Thanksgiving and Christmas, it's not really what you would do for production to sell. If you're thinking of selling, you might get enough to do a couple of small batch canners. But, just for fresh eating, it's kind of a novelty, and it's fun to share that with your friends and neighbors when you get those. And when it slows down like that last little bit, sometimes I do those for the dehydrating, and we're going to do a whole episode on dehydrating a little later in the season. We like mostly heirloom tomatoes. However, we do use some hybrid tomatoes. Now remember, we've talked about this before. Heirloom, sometimes they're branded Heritage, but they say OP if you're looking at a sheet or the description. OP, which stands for open pollinated. Now those are the heirloom varieties. Usually the heirloom varieties taste better. They don't yield as much, but they sure taste better. But we also need heavy yield because we make a tomato jam, and we're working on several other things that we're going to be rolling out with our commercial line of jams and jellies. And so we need some bulk as well. So this year we're doing Red Deuce for our hybrid, right?
Yes, Red Deuce is a hybrid that was introduced to us through the Amish community here in Kentucky, and that's what they grow for their retail sales tomatoes, and they're very uniform. They really got a good taste to them for a hybrid.
Yeah, they do, and they yield well. I mean, we don't care if they ship well or not. So I mean, they still have a good texture and a good taste. But we beef that up. We also like using the Amish paste, which is an open pollinated. Now last year we got in trouble with that because there's two different kinds of Amish paste. There's one that's a determinate. And when we talk about determinate, again, when it's a determinate, it does a big flush. So if you're doing canning, that's what you really, really want is those determinate tomatoes because it'll do a big flush so you get enough to fill your canners. Or you do an indeterminate, which just comes on in the season, and that's more for good eating all season long. But there's two different kinds of Amish paste. There is a determinate and an indeterminate. Yes. And the way you string them in the greenhouse, there's a difference, or in the high tunnel. And last year we got some that we thought were determinate that ended up indeterminate, and they just, they went, we expected them to stop at 7 or 8 feet, and they went 13 or 14 feet up in the high tunnel, and it was just like a forest and a whole lot of work.
Well, while we're on that, we'll talk about, we've got a system that we use called the lower and lean system for our indeterminate tomatoes. And what we did is when I built the high tunnel, I call it an airplane cable, metal cable that's woven together, and we attached that to the frame of the high tunnel and ran it over the support beams, the rafters, so to speak. And we did that in order to hold the weight of those tomatoes. And on that, we used a
J-hook. I've got some pictures of the J-hook I'll drop in.
And the J-hook system is the greatest system ever. You got all your twine wrapped around that, and you just lower it all the way to the bottom of the tomato.
As it grows up, you lower it down. And in between those times, sometimes you're pruning too.
You prune your tomatoes, but you also, they have these little plastic clips. We'll get a picture of those, maybe stick in there. The little white clips, and around they attach to the string, and then they clip around the tomato. They're about an inch diameter.
About like that.
So you can have a pretty good sized stem coming through those. And then as you go up, when you lower them, you take it and you lower it like a foot at a time, where you take that clip off the bottom and you let those vines just curl up on the ground.
Just like a snaky almost.
You strip all the leaves and limbs off of them below the tomatoes.
Right. So we learned about this. If you're looking for a good source, we have no shame. We will definitely say that we love John Martin Fortier and we love Ben Hartman. Those are two authors that we have personally met, have had the pleasure of having dinner and running around town with. John Martin Fortier his book is called The Market Gardener. And what is really great about that book is it tells you, he calls it French bio-intensive planting. And you will notice when we plant our tomatoes in the high tunnel, what are we doing? What are we doing at 12 to 18 inches?
More like 12 inches.
12 inches between each tomato, which is really tight, y'all. That's really tight.
But you got to prune. That's the biggest thing you got to learn to prune. Cut all the suckers off. You want to take no more than 2 main leads going up. You know, if you've raised tomatoes, you know, especially the indeterminate tomatoes, they will just ramble all over the place. But you got to keep them trained. It's just like when you're doing the
trellis and an espalade, like
yes.
an apple tree. You know, you got to train it the way you want it to fill out.
And if you're like Joyce and you hate to waste, she takes and those cuttings, she hates to cut them at all. It took us 2 years to get past the point of pruning it all. And then she would take the prunings and stick them in a piece of water and let them root, make more tomatoes. And the next thing you know, instead of having 300, which we normally have in the high tunnel, we'll have 500 if we got 200 more in the field.
But, you know, you can never have enough tomatoes. Am I right here? Am I right? You can never have enough tomatoes. He got mad at me last night because there was a kind of a sorry one, and he said, let's just throw that one out. I'm like, oh no, let's put it in the high tunnel and give it a chance. Let's give it a chance.
So not only is she a lover of animals, she's a lover of plants too.
So when we're talking about the high tunnel, as you're planning your work week, you really want to work it in the morning and in the evenings. You do not want to go down there in the heat of the day. You want it done before, before 9 o'clock in the morning. And
get out.
Get out
at
early.
daylight. Get out at daylight. Work while you can. Work as long as you can stand it. Usually we'll work till 10 or 11 o'clock. About the time the sun comes up where we're at, it gets really hot, and then you won't be able to go back till 6 or 7, maybe even 8 o'clock in the evening.
Depending on how late it is in the season.
How late in the season. Right now you can get down there about 4 or 5 o'clock and you work till 8.
Now we were late getting these out by standards if we were growing for market. We're growing again for our own business, our jam business. But so our plants got a little bit leggy. I mean, we grew them in the window this year. We usually grow under lights, but it takes up so much room to grow the amount of tomatoes that we need to put out that we thought, well, we're just going to try some here at the store and see how they do, because we have big storefront windows and we put heat mats under them. Heat mats is key, y'all. If you have the heat and you have the domes on top of them, they really take off. Right now we've got our peppers going. We should have probably started the peppers before we started the tomatoes, but we were just working on a space constraint. So this is the way we're going to do that.
Really an experiment for us here this year. We've never done it this way before, but we wanted to show, especially for you guys, how easy it can be done. And tomatoes are the most forgiving of the semi-tropical plants, so to speak.
What they call a nightshade.
Yes.
Other plants that are in that nightshade family include eggplant and peppers. So with the tomatoes, they did get a little leggy. Of course, we've got the strings. You'll see the strings hanging down so we can clip them up. So even though they were a little tall, they're clipped up. They'll be fine.
These are a little bigger than I'd like, but so we're having to tie them as we go. Putting the first ties on to start with. Got the watering system on to go ahead and water them in good. We'll let it run for an hour or two tonight and get them in there good. Now we plant pretty intense and then trim them up good.
So late in the season, when the nurseries start doing their sales, you could buy those overgrown tomatoes at the nursery for little or nothing. Strip those bottom leaves, lay them in like a trench, and so you're putting maybe half of the stem under the ground, and that just gives you more roots and gives you more nutrients, and then you can get that last little bit. We were glad that we didn't put the tomatoes out as early as maybe we should have, because if you put them out early, even in a high tunnel, you have to use what they call agribond or some kind of frost blanket. It looks like, for you all that sew, it looks like Pellon. It's kind of a fused, It's not really a woven, it's a fused type little thin pelon-y blanket type thing. And going down and covering them up, you know, when you got tomatoes that are tall, it's just gonna break them off. You know, we do that when we're doing our greens in the fall. We'll cover them, you know, to keep the frost off of them, give them that extra layer. But in the spring, it's just kind of a pain. Our last frost date, we've talked about what zone we're in, but we're in USDA Zone 6, A, B, A. We're in 6A, which is Kentucky Appalachia. And so our first frost, our April 15th is last frost date. And then again, about October 15th or so will be our last frost date.
And the thing with the high tunnel is it gives you about a month before anybody else. So instead of going April the 15th, we could have put our tomatoes out on like March the 15th, kept the agribon on them to cover them, and still been ahead of the game, which we're really ahead of the game here because nobody's going to be able to plant tomatoes here probably really until June.
Usually
April,
by the end of May.
End of May. So we're about a month ahead of everybody here now already in April. And the thing is, you can actually, and with the drip irrigation, so you can give all your nutrients to your plants through that drip.
Through a fertigator. So you can use actual fertilizer and feed it through those lines via a liquid fertilizer.
And you can get organic fertilizer for that as well.
And one of the things you have to worry about, I was blessed to be able to go down to South Carolina at a big conference. And one of the things that they talked about was if you use too much fertilizer in your high tunnel, not only is that bad for your plants, but it builds up over time and you get all these salts, and then it makes it harder and harder to have a really good production. So what they recommend is you flood, you know, you have your soil tested just like you would if it was out in the field. You have your soil tested, maybe once a year, every 2 years. Make sure that you haven't got salt buildup. If you've got too much salts build up, what they do is they talk about flooding the high tunnel, and you literally let water run for a full day. Just let it run, and that kind of filters it out. But what they were doing in South Carolina is they were blessed to have several high tunnels. And so what they did was they would plant commercial sunflowers. So you plant those sunflowers, and sunflowers will take up a lot of those nutrients and strip it out, and then you can start over again because sunflowers are really heavy feeders. So they would rotate, they would grow their commercial sunflowers in one high tunnel 1 year, and then they'd switch it to the next, and that helped keep the soil balanced. Now, one of the things that is crazy is we've tried 2 or 3 different kinds of mulch in the high tunnel. The pictures that you'll see, we haven't got cleaned up as good as we should have. We're a little behind on that as well. But we tried the first year, we tried that really light.
Yeah, what you'd buy at Lowe's or something like that. It's a almost like the Pelon type, but it's a color. And
the regular, y'all know the landscape fabric that you would use if you were working around your patio.
Right.
And that did not work for us at all. Just don't do it. It's not. You're just wasting your money. So when you're laying the landscape, the really good heavy agriculture fabric down, you lay it in the row, and then it comes up to the side of the plant on one side, and then you run another layer down and you cover it up this way. And what that does is so you've got this little bit of area to weed. And also because you've got that plastic on it, it prevents evaporation so that it stays moist under that blanket. It stays warm and moist. And that's just exactly what tomatoes like because they are kind of a tropical plant and they love that.
And if you get the wider fabric, you can do, on some of ours we had the rows wider than others. We slit the fabric and then slide it right up through there so there's nothing sticking out but the tomato plant.
Right. Now if we had been really just gung-ho this year, we could have planted, pulled the plastic back a little bit, and if we early like we are, you could go on and plant greens in that row along with your tomatoes to harvest. I think it's a pain if you were doing it commercially, but if you wanted a few greens just to eat at the table, because by the time the tomatoes start to take off, the greens are going to be done. You can do that. John Martin Fortier talks about that in his book, The Market Gardener.
Called companion planting.
Yeah, and that's a good thing. One of the problems with tomatoes in the greenhouse is aphids and whiteflies. And it's gonna happen to you, y'all, no matter how great you are at maintaining. So face it, sometimes you may have to spray, and it's something that we hate. We abhor it. We try to do as much organically as we can. But if you're gonna lose, there's a difference between losing your crop or spraying. You probably are gonna have to spray from time to time in a high tunnel. We also had a problem with army caterpillars. It was army caterpillars. One year we had army caterpillars really bad. We've only had it that 1 year. I don't know what the deal was, but I would get up real early in the morning and go down and pull them off of there and stomp them.
And you got tomatoes. You also gonna get the tomato hornworm, which is just, and it starts out as a little bit green worm. Grab it while it's little, because it will destroy a tomato in 1 day.
Yep, you'd be surprised how fast they can
They are ravenous.
So keep an eye on your leaves. We've talked about this before, but if you see bugs on there and you can't identify them, take a picture, ship it off to you, and send it an email to your local extension agent. They will send it off. If they don't know what it is, they'll send it off to the state entomologist, and they will tell you what it is and how you can fix it.
And one of the advantages of using high tunnel for us in tomato production especially is it limits your disease pressure. It really, and people don't understand, a lot of times the water is the biggest problem you have with tomatoes outside. When a tomato, you ever seen when they crack on the top and all that? Normally that's because you got too much water. Most people think you just let them grow too fast. Well, that's not true. And especially with the heirloom tomatoes, like we like to grow a Cherokee purple.
We love
and
Cherokee
I'll tell you,
purple.
man, they are good. They're over here in the tray right now getting ready. They're a really rich, dark flavored tomato, but they really are bad to crack and struggle in the field, but they do 10 times better
in
in
the
high
high
tunnel.
tunnel. And because they're getting the consistent flow of water, they don't crack as bad. They still crack.
Yeah.
They still crack. That's kind of the nature of them. But because they're getting a more consistent water flow, they're not dependent on rain that's intermittent. They do so much better. Some of the heirloom varieties that we like Cherokee purple. We grow a peach tomato. It's a little yellow tomato.
It's
cute.
bigger than a cherry tomato, but it's not as big as, but they got a little fuzz on the outside, and they're about the sweetest tomato you'll ever have.
They're a lot of fun. We also like, I like a White Wonder. We don't grow a lot of those for the commercial, but White Wonder it's a white tomato. You got to kind of get used to when they're ripe, because they always look like they're a green tomato. But a White Wonder doesn't have a lot of when you cut a tomato and you get all that gel inside, the White Wonders don't have a lot of that seedy gel. And so the White Wonders, you slice them up and fry them, and that's the best frying tomato there is, y'all, bar none. Now, I will fry any tomato, don't get me wrong. But the White Wonder they just don't have that jelly, so they're easy to batter. Get some cornmeal on them. They stick. It's just a fine. It stays firm. It doesn't get slimy when you fry it. One of my very favorites.
That's true. We've grown a lot of heirloom tomatoes over the years. Usually, we've done the mortgage lifters, which are a really good tomato, got a really good story.
Good production, high production for an heirloom, or the more. It was Charlie's. We talked about this last week. But they're called Radiator Charlie is what they're called. Those are the best of the mortgage lifters. And then another one that I absolutely love is Mr. Stripey. Now it grows, it's kind of a red and yellow. It gets yellow highlights, looks like a sunset almost. Now Mr. Stripey is good sandwich eating. There's a restaurant down in Frankfort, Kentucky called Rick's Starlight Inn, or I believe it's Starlight Inn, but Rick's Diner. He takes those stripey tomatoes, puts on a Wagyu beef hamburger, takes a layer of peanut butter between the hamburger and this Mr. Stripey tomato, and I know that sounds weird, but when you bite into that, that is the best hamburger I have ever had, and that convinced me even more, because Stripey is kind of a tradition just in our area, but that convinced me that we would always be growing some Stripeys just for eating at home. and for sharing with the neighbors and mama.
Rutgers is another heirloom tomato that's really good. It was a good production tomato.
It was developed for production.
Yes.
It was developed in New Jersey, of all places, which used to be known as a tomato capital.
Named after the Rutgers University.
So we've talked a little bit about the high tunnel and what the difference between a high tunnel is and a greenhouse.
Right.
We've talked about indeterminate and determinate tomatoes. We've talked about heirloom and open pollinated versus a hybrid, which is an F1. We've talked about the different varieties that we enjoy. What else do we need to talk about, Charlie?
Well, we talked about the lower and lean
Lower
system.
and lean system.
Also in the high tunnel, you got to think about what you're planting. Tomatoes are self-pollinating. Peppers are self-pollinating. So, because that's one of the issues about a high tunnel is pollination. So now if you want to grow cucumbers, now that can be an issue. You have to bring in a pollinator such as bumblebees or
there's some hybrid, you can plant hybrids and then plant some,
and
there's a fancy name for it, but you plant a few of the other ones to give it some cross-pollination. One thing we did not talk about with the high tunnel and our rolled up sides. Ladies, they're hard to roll up. If you got the money and you can get the ones that automatically roll up, man, that makes it easy for you. Because they are a little tough, and they will blow back and knock you on your butt. The other thing, when you roll up the sides, that gives varmints an entry. So we didn't talk about, we've got, Charlie, what do you call that stuff?
it's basically a bird netting. This one is a little heavier than the regulars. We stapled that up we put up a little frame and we stapled it all the way down or zip tie it to the frames of the high tunnel and also to the doors. We put it on the doors so that, because if you leave it open, something's gonna walk in. But anything that doesn't dig can walk right through those though, because you got a 4-foot opening. So we did all that, and you can actually, if you want to spend the money, we haven't done it yet, but you can buy insect netting too that will keep the insects out and
probably put that over top of the varmint net,
yes,
just as a double. We didn't really talk about how we ended up with the high tunnel, and we were really blessed. We got an NCRS grant, National Resources grant. It was processed. You had to get a farm number and you had to show how much sales you had had before. And each state is different in their requirements to get a high tunnel. But even though we got the grant that paid for the high tunnel and paid for the construction of the high tunnel, there was still some cost, that you're gonna have to absorb. There's site preparation. You gotta get it level. We thought we got our level, and we've still got one side that still has a lot of moisture in it. We had put in French drains around the high tunnel, and we had ditched out
right,
maybe 12, 15 feet. We ditched it out. We thought that we had that under control. But that's something that you need to think about. You also need to think about solar panels to power the fan.
Yeah, we didn't talk about the fan.
Yeah,
you can use electric, just regular electric power, 110.
It's about this big.
It's just a little bit bigger than a computer fan. But we chose, we chose to go with a solar powered fan. And we've got a battery and we hook a solar panel up to it, and that's what powers the fan, because for us it would have been cost prohibitive to run. We'd have to run a whole new electric wire because it's about 500 feet from the house. And so it's a lot of money to do that, and it was cheaper to put in the solar fan.
The other thing we did not talk about was we have dual capacity with our irrigation system. We have gutters. They're real easy to take. You'd have to take them off in the snow time, but they're real easy to take. I can take them off without Charlie, so they're not hard to take on and off. We have gutters that catch water, and then we have 2 catchment systems that feed it through. If we had it to do over again with those catchment systems, when we had the pump that works that, we would have probably put what they call a grinder, because we're still getting some leaves, and that can muck up your system.
Yes.
But we also have the ability to use water piped into city water from
Yes.
it. So we've got 2 alternatives. We prefer to use the rainwater when we can, but we've had droughts and problems, so having the backups is always good. 2 ways is always good, no matter whether you're buying groceries, whether you're working on your garden. with equipment, 2 is always better than 1. So you're saving time and eventually you're really saving money in the long haul.
Yeah, always have a backup. We have at least 2 batteries, and I have one on a charger all the time. If it goes for a week or so, we don't have any sunlight, and the battery goes down, we go put another battery in and use that as a backup. So always have a backup for all your systems.
Y'all, we are excited to be bringing you more now that the weather is starting to get a little warmer. It's going to go down in the 30s this weekend by the time you're seeing this. So you're not going to see us outside a whole lot because I like it hot. But we're getting ready to really get into the garden and show you what's going on and more issues from the high tunnel and what we're dealing with. And we're going to be talking about making commercial jam. We've got a show coming up in Lexington in a few weeks where we'll be selling our jam. And y'all, you can check our jams out online, friendsdriftinn.com. We do ship throughout the United States of America. We have 4-packs and 6-packs available. It's coming up on Mother's Day. Don't forget about it.
It'll be a sweet gift for Mama.
Yep. And don't forget, when we get to 2,500 subscribers, we are going to start doing live conversations so we can talk to you, because that's what we really want to do. This talking heads is not cutting it for us. We really want to talk to you. So tell your friends, tell your neighbors, subscribe, hit that like button, hit the little bell so you get the notifications when we're coming on. We appreciate y'all. We hope you have a blessed day. We continue to grow a good life in Appalachia. We're Friends Drift In, and I'm Joyce.
I'm Charlie.
And we're signing out.